Ms. Carter stepped into room 204 for the first time, her boots barely making a sound on the faded tile floor as she crossed the threshold. Her eyes moved slowly across the classroom, not with the usual uncertainty of a new teacher, but with a calculated calm that seemed out of place in a high school. The students barely looked up at first, already judging her by the way she wore an old tan cardigan and carried a bag that looked like it had been through a war, the kind of accessory that belonged more in a military surplus store than a classroom. She looked like someone who would forget your name, someone who would take attendance with a soft smile and never raise her voice, someone who would crumble under pressure. But Ms. Carter didn't smile. She just stood there for a long moment, eyes scanning the room, not just looking at the students, but reading them, assessing their movements, their posture, the way they held their phones under the desks or leaned back like they owned the place. It was only a few seconds, but it felt longer. Somehow Jason in the back with his hoodie up glanced at Mia across the room and mouthed the word, "weak." Mia giggled softly, then mimicked tripping over her own feet as she imagined the new teacher panicking. At the first sign of trouble, none of them knew anything about her, and yet they had already made up their minds. The classroom smelled faintly of old paper and teenage sweat, and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead gave the room a dull, lifeless tone that matched the mood. Ms. Carter set her bag on the desk slowly, deliberately, then turned to the whiteboard and picked up a marker, her hand steady as stone. She wrote her name in block letters, not the usual curly handwriting of someone trying. To be friendly or relatable, no smiley faces, no hearts, just the name Miss Carter. Her voice was low when she spoke, and though it was not loud, it carried easily across the room with a kind of weight that made a few students pause mid-whisper. "Today," she said, "we begin with silence." The room did not go silent. In fact, a few students laughed. One boy tapped a pencil on his desk. Another dropped a textbook on the floor for attention. Ms. Carter just stood there, not moving, not reacting, not even blinking. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, and her eyes fixed on a spot in the middle of the room, not looking at anyone in particular, and yet somehow making every student feel watched. The silence began to spread. Not because she demanded it, but because something about her presence made noise feel wrong. Mia rolled her eyes again and nudged her friend with a smirk. "Watch this," she whispered. She pulled out her phone and began filming Miss Carter from under the desk, but the second she tapped record, Miss Carter turned her head just slightly and looked directly at Mia, with a gaze that felt cold and endless. Mia dropped the phone without realizing she had done it. The room went quiet after that, not in fear but in confusion, because no one could quite understand what was happening. Ms. Carter didn't look angry or offended or even strict. She looked like someone who had seen things no one in this room could imagine. She looked like someone who didn't need to prove herself. She looked like someone who had already won 1,000 battles in places none of them could name. The students didn't know what to do with that. So they did what they always did. They tested. Jason casually knocked his chair back and stood up stretched, then asked, with exaggerated politeness, if he could use the bathroom. Miss Carter nodded once and said sure. Jason walked slowly past her, expecting her to flinch or step back. She didn't. She didn't move at all. He opened the door and left as the door closed. Behind him, Ms. Carter's eyes stayed locked on the class, and she continued as if nothing had happened. "Turn to page 5, she said, "and begin reading to yourselves." Again, her voice was soft but impossible to ignore. The students opened their books, not because they respected her, not yet, but because something about her told them that if they didn't, they would regret it. There was no yelling, no threats, no detentions handed out. Just a quiet pressure in the room that made disobedience feel small and pointless. It was only the first 10 minutes of class, and yet room 204 had already changed. As if daring a teacher to say something, but the hallways were mostly empty and quiet the way they always were during the first period when everyone was still waking up. He thought about the way the new teacher had just looked at him, like she could see through him, like she didn't care one way or the other, whether he left or stayed. And something about that look had stayed with him longer than it should have. He shrugged it off. Old lady probably had nerves of steel from dealing with kids like him. No big deal. Back in room 204, the silence lingered. Not the tense silence of discipline or fear, but something colder, something that made the fluorescent light seem harsher and the air feel heavier. Ms. Carter walked slowly between the desks, her footsteps so soft they might as well have been imagined, her eyes not focused on any one student, but seeming to take in everything, every glance, every twitch, every page turn. Mia shifted in her seat, trying not to look at her phone again, but the weight of that earlier stare had unsettled her. She glanced at Ava across the aisle, who mouthed the word creepy and raised her eyebrows. Ms. Carter didn't miss a thing. Without warning, she stopped at the back of the classroom where a desk sat empty. She looked down at the name tag on the desk. Jason, it said in thick black. Marker Miss Carter reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather notebook. She opened it slowly and scribbled something in it, her face completely unreadable. Then she looked up. Who here thinks I am weak? She asked in that same calm voice. That's... Question came so suddenly that even Mia froze. The class looked around, confused. Was it a joke? Was it a trap? Nobody answered. Miss Carter closed the notebook and slipped it back into her bag. Good, she said, because weakness is not something I bring into this room. She returned to the front of the class and began to write something on the board. Her handwriting was perfect, straight, sharp, deliberate. The words formed a sentence. Strength does not always speak loudly. Mia stared at the board. Then at Miss Carter, then at the scar along her left wrist that was visible now as her sleeve had pulled back slightly. It didn't look like a paper cut or an accident. It looked deliberate. It looked earned. Jason returned to the classroom, slouching as he walked through the door, glancing around like he expected everyone to cheer his little act of rebellion, but no one said a word. Ms. Carter didn't even look at him. She simply pointed to his seat. Jason hesitated for a second, then walked back, slowly, and dropped into his chair with more force than necessary. The silence held for a moment longer before Miss Carter turned back to the board and began the lesson. The topic was conflict. Conflict in literature. Conflict in the world. Conflict within ourselves. But the way she spoke made it feel like she wasn't just talking about books. She described tension and moral struggle and decisions made in darkness and how characters reveal their truth only when tested. Her words felt too specific, too lived in, like she was not teaching from a textbook but from something buried much deeper. As she moved through the lesson, the students began to listen in spite of themselves. They stopped whispering. They stopped glancing at their phones because, for the first time in any class they had taken this year, it felt like something real was happening. It felt like this woman in front of them was not pretending, not following a script, but speaking from the edge of something they could not name. When the bell rang to end the period, no one moved. Not at first. They just stared at her, like she had broken some spell they hadn't known they were under. Ms. Carter calmly erased the board, picked up her bag, and nodded once. "You are dismissed," she said. Slowly, the students began to file out. Mia stayed behind for a second. She opened her mouth as if to ask something, but Ms. Carter was already walking toward the window, her back turned. Mia hesitated, then left without saying a word. In the hallway, Jason shoved his hands into his pockets again, but he walked a little faster this time, and his shoulders were tense. None of them knew what had just happened, but all of them knew something was not normal about room 204. The morning passed slowly after room 204. and the rest of the day felt dull in comparison, like the lights had dimmed or the world had shifted slightly out of place. Jason sat in his next class staring at the clock, tapping his pen against the desk, not hearing a word the teacher said because his mind kept drifting back to the way Ms. Carter had looked at him. Not angry, not annoyed, but like she knew things about him that even he didn't know. Mia sat with her phone in her lap, scrolling through social media until she finally searched the school faculty list, trying to find anything about Ms. Carter. But there was nothing. No teacher profile, no picture, no background, just a name. Temporary substitute, it said, assigned by district. A request. She showed the screen to Ava, who frowned and whispered, "Weird, right? Like, where is she even from?" Mia nodded slowly, suddenly aware that she had never seen Ms. Carter in the staff parking lot, or in the lounge, or in the cafeteria. It was like she appeared out of nowhere. At lunch, Jason leaned against the lockers with his usual crowd, but he wasn't joking like he normally did. He was watching the hallway, his eyes tracking every teacher who passed. But Ms. Carter never came by. "Dude, you good?" someone asked. Jason shrugged. "Just tired," he said, but he wasn't tired. He was alert, more alert than he'd been in weeks, because something in room 204 had changed him. It was like being around her had triggered a feeling he couldn't explain, a kind of instinct that told him she was more than she claimed. After school, the building emptied fast as usual, and the janitors moved through the halls, pushing carts and whistling as they swept. But room 204 remained locked. Lights off. No sign of Ms. Carter, which was strange because she was scheduled for an after-school tutoring session, and no one had seen her leave. Jason stood across the hallway, watching the dark door like it might open on its own. Then something caught his eye. The library lights flickered. Just once. Then again. He turned his head slowly. Through the glass windows, he could see a figure moving between the shelves, not fast, not slow, just steady, like someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. He moved. Closer, Ms. Carter was standing near the back of the library, her back to him, her hand on a book with no title on its spine. Jason hesitated, then tapped on the glass. She didn't move. He opened the door quietly and stepped inside. The silence in the library was thicker than usual, and the air was cool and dry and full of that old book smell that somehow made everything feel older. Ms. Carter turned around calmly, her expression unreadable, her eyes meeting his. Without surprise, Jason froze. "I thought you had tutoring," he said. She nodded. "Then why are you here?" She looked at the book again, then placed it back on the shelf with a kind of reverence, like it was more than just paper. Sometimes, she said, knowledge hides in quiet places. Jason frowned. "That doesn't really answer my question." Ms. Carter stepped forward, and for a moment Jason felt a strange pressure in the air, like the room was holding its breath. "What do you want to know?" she asked. Jason opened his mouth, then stopped. He didn't even know what he was asking, really. "Why are you like that?" he said. Finally. "Like what? Like you're not scared of anything." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that what you think?" Jason didn't reply. She stepped past him toward the door, and for a second, Jason caught a glimpse of something under her sleeve, a tattoo faded and sharp like the kind military guys had. He looked at her but said nothing. "You should go home now," she said. And then she left. Jason stood there in the library alone for a long time. He didn't tell anyone about what he saw. He didn't even know how to explain it. But that night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the scar, the tattoo, the notebook, the way she moved like someone trained, like someone dangerous, and the next morning when he walked into room 204, he wasn't the only one who felt it. Every student sat a little straighter. Every whisper was quieter, because they all knew now. Something about Ms. Carter was not normal, and none of them wanted to be. The one who pushed her far enough to find out what that something really was. By the time Thursday arrived, the school halls buzzed with whispers, none of them loud enough to be heard by teachers, but all of them centered around one person, Ms. Carter. She had become a mystery, and mysteries in high school were rare and addictive. It was not just her calm, not just the way she handled disrespect with silence and stillness. It was something deeper, something that made the students feel like they were in the presence of someone not meant for classrooms. Mia could not stop thinking about the tattoo. She had not seen it herself, but Jason had told her in a low voice at lunch, and something about the way he said it made her believe him. A military tattoo, maybe, or something worse. They sat at the end of the cafeteria whispering over fries while Jason drew the shape he remembered on a napkin. It looked like a triangle with lines across it like a bird maybe or a wing. Ava leaned in and squinted. "That looks like something from a movie," she said. Jason shook his head. "Nah, it was real. I saw it when she adjusted her sleeve." And then he told them about the scar about the book, with no title, about how she said knowledge hides in quiet places. Mia looked around. "You think she's like ex-CIA or something?" Jason shrugged. "Maybe. I think she's done things. The kind of things you don't brag about." They all fell silent. For the rest of the day, Mia watched Ms. Carter closely. She noticed how Ms. Carter never ate in the staff room, how she never checked her phone, how she never made small talk. It was like she only existed when she was teaching and then disappeared when class ended. Mia decided to do something about it. After school, she went to the computer lab and searched public records. She typed in Ms. Carter Lincoln. High substitute nothing. Then she tried Carter. Substitute profile, still nothing. Even the school's own website only listed her as temporary assignment from district level. That was not normal. Every teacher had a page, a picture, a bio, a degree. But Ms. Carter had nothing. So Mia went further. She searched military tattoos symbols and found something that made her stomach twist. The symbol Jason had drawn looked almost exactly like the insignia used by Navy SEAL teams, especially those involved in special operations. She turned the screen toward Jason. "Look," he stared for a moment. "That's it. That's what I saw. The same shape, the same lines." Mia clicked deeper. The symbol was often linked to elite units within the military, especially those involved in covert missions. Jason leaned back in his chair. "No way. No way. She's that. Why would a Navy SEAL be teaching high school?" Mia frowned. "Maybe she's hiding. Or maybe she's watching something." Ava laughed nervously. "Or someone." The idea settled over them like a shadow. Meanwhile, in room 204, Ms. Carter was alone. She stood by the window watching the school courtyard below as students filed out toward the buses. Her hand rested on the edge of her desk, and her eyes scanned every face. She had seen the napkin drawing. She had seen the students whispering. She knew they were curious. She expected it. She had prepared for it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small metal box, opening it slowly and revealing a stack of photographs. Men in uniform. A dusty road. A child holding a broken radio. She stared at the last one for a long time. Then she put the box away. Outside, Jason stood under the tree near the bike rack watching her through the window. She didn't move, but he could tell she saw him. He turned away quickly. There was something different in her eyes. Not just intensity, something older. Something he had only seen once before. When his older brother came back from overseas, it was not just the look of someone who had been through war. It was the look of someone who never left it. The bell rang again. Jason walked away, and high above the hallway, Ms. Carter turned off the lights. The room darkened in silence. No one knew her story. Not yet. But the walls of room 204 had seen things they could not unsee, and something was coming. something none of them were ready for. The next day began like any other, but the atmosphere around room 204 had shifted again, more tense, more alert. Like the students were waiting for something to break open, Mia arrived early, her backpack slung low and her laptop open before the bell even rang. She kept glancing at the door, expecting Miss Carter to arrive at her usual time, but minutes passed and still no sign. Jason came in next, his eyes scanning the room immediately. "Where is she?" he asked. Mia shrugged. "She's never late." 5 more minutes passed. Then 10, then 15, and the room remained quiet. The students began to whisper again, but this time their voices carried unease. It was not like Miss Carter to miss anything. And then, just as the late bell rang, the door opened, and she stepped inside. But something was different. Her face was the same calm, unreadable expression, but her clothes were slightly disheveled, and her right hand was wrapped in gauze. She set her bag down slowly and faced the class without speaking. The whispers stopped. Her eyes moved from student to student, pausing for a second longer on Jason and Mia. Finally, she spoke. "There may be a substitute tomorrow. I suggest you make the most of today." The words were simple, but the way she said them carried weight like a final warning or a message in code. Mia raised her hand hesitantly. "Are you okay, Ms. Carter?" A brief pause. Ms. Carter nodded. "Just a small accident. Nothing to worry about," but her voice was quieter and her posture more rigid. Wu wrote the lesson on the board, but her mind seemed elsewhere. Halfway through class, Jason leaned forward. He could not take it anymore. "Where did you come from?" he asked, not loudly, not rudely, but with honest curiosity. Ms. Carter stopped writing. She turned slowly and looked directly at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped toward the front of the room and leaned against the desk. "I came from a place where people did not have the luxury of asking questions." The room went still. She looked around at each of them, her eyes sharp, but not angry. "You all think this is a game, that the world outside these walls is fair and soft and kind. It is not. There are places where rules do not protect you, where silence is the only shield." You have Jason swallowed. "Why are you here, then?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Because sometimes you have to hide in plain sight." Mia felt a chill. The bell rang and class ended, but no one moved. Not right away. Ms. Carter picked up her bag and walked out without another word. Jason and Mia looked at each other. They needed answers. That night, Mia stayed up researching deeper into the military archives. She found a declassified report from over a decade ago, an operation in a place called Saran Province. No names, no photos, but there was one section redacted except for a code name. Shadowbird. Mia stared at it. The insignia matched the napkin drawing exactly. She saved the file. Jason met her at the coffee shop near campus, and they read the report together. "This is her," he said, "Shadowbird." She was part of this mission, but what happened after? They scrolled further. Ambush, 3 survivors. One vanished without trace, presumed dead. Mia looked up. She didn't die. She disappeared. Jason leaned back. And now she's here. Why, the next day, Ms. Carter was gone. A different teacher stood at the front of room 204, a cheerful man with glasses and a clipboard. He smiled and said, Ms. Carter had taken a personal day, but the students exchanged looks. They knew something was wrong. At lunch, Jason got a message from a blocked number. "Stop digging," he showed Mia. Her hands shook. That night, Jason found his bike tires slashed. He told no one, just watched and waited. Whatever. Ms. Carter had left. Behind. It was not finished with her. And now it was circling back. Through whispers. Through shadows. Through silent threats in the dark. She was not just hiding, she was protecting them from something or someone, and whatever it was already here. The day after the substitute arrived, the school felt wrong. Not in any obvious way, not in a fire alarm or power outage kind of way, but in that low, uneasy hum that creeps under the skin when something dangerous is nearby, but no one can see it yet. Jason sat in the back of room 204, barely listening to the new teacher who smiled too much and talked too fast, and filled the room with a kind of fake light that only made the shadows seem darker. He kept checking his phone every few minutes. No new messages, no sign of Ms. Carter, no answers. Mia walked into the room late, her eyes darting around before she sat beside Jason, her voice a whisper. Something happened last night. What, someone tried to break into my house? Jason stared at her. Did they take anything? She shook her head. They didn't go inside. I think they just wanted me to know they were there. Jason's mind raced. He remembered the message, the slashed tires now. It wasn't random. It was a warning. That evening they met at the library again, the same corner where Jason first saw Ms. Carter with the strange book. They spread out everything they had. The symbol, the redacted file, the code name, Shadowbird, the photos Mia had printed from her late-night research. We're missing something, Jason said. Mia nodded. She pulled out a newspaper clipping, old and yellowed, the headline nearly torn off. 3 U.S. operatives killed in classified mission. No bodies recovered. No public statement, buried deep in the archive. Mia tapped the date. This happened 12 years ago. Jason looked at her. What if she was the 4th operative? The one that vanished? She was. But why come back now? Why teach here? Mia hesitated. Maybe she didn't come back. Maybe she never left. Maybe she's been in hiding and something's flushed her out. They both looked at the article again. In the corner was a blurry photo of a young woman in uniform, barely visible, but the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, it was enough. It was her. It was Ms. Carter. But back then she wasn't Ms. Carter. She was Lieutenant Kara Dawson. Jason whispered the name like it had weight. Kara. They stared at each other. This changes everything. Suddenly the library lights flickered. Both of them froze. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow, deliberate. Jason shoved the papers back into the folder. Let's go. They slipped out the side door just as a shadow passed by the main entrance. Outside, the wind had picked up and the air felt sharp. Jason looked over his shoulder. A man in a dark coat stood across the parking lot, too far to see clearly, but definitely watching. The next morning, Ms. Carter returned. Her hand was still wrapped in gauze, and there was a bruise along her jaw. She tried to hide with her hair. She walked into room 204 and said nothing. The class was silent. Even the loud kids, even the ones who usually mocked her. She didn't write on the board, didn't pass out worksheets. She just stood there. And then she looked at Jason and Mia, out in the hallway, now. The 3 of them stood just outside the classroom. Miss Carter looked tired, like she hadn't slept, like she had been running for years, and finally slowed down just enough to realize how much it cost. You 2 have been digging. Jason swallowed. We had to? She nodded slowly. Of course you did, but now you need to stop. Mia stepped forward. Why are they following us? Because they want what I have. What do you have? Ms. Carter looked at them, and for the first time, she did not look like a teacher. She looked like a soldier. Information, names, proof. I kept a record of everything, and they know. Jason felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Are we in danger? Yes. The hallway went silent. Ms. Carter reached into her bag and handed them a flash drive. You need to take this to someone who can protect it, someone who can make it public. But what about you? She glanced back toward room 204. I'm going to buy you time. Mia stared at her. You're not coming with us. Ms. Carter gave the smallest of smiles. Some people run, others stay and hold the line. Now go. Jason and Mia ran through the parking lot, the flash drive burning in Jason's pocket like a signal flare. Neither spoke. They just moved fast away from the school, away from room 204, away from the shadows that seemed to be closing in from all directions. The city felt bigger than ever, not in a good way, but in the way a maze feels when you know something is hunting you through it. They ducked into an alley behind the corner deli and caught their breath. Jason pulled out the drive and stared at it. What do we even do with this? Mia was shaking but trying not to show it. She said someone could make it public. Jason nodded. I know a guy, my brother's friend. He works at that podcast studio. He's done whistleblower stories before. Mia looked at him. Are you sure we can trust him? Jason shrugged. Not really, but we're out of time. They borrowed Jason's older brother's car and drove across town the whole time, checking mirrors, checking windows, checking instincts. They didn't see the black SUV that started following them 2 blocks from the school. When they arrived at the studio, a warehouse tucked behind an industrial park, the door was locked. Jason knocked 3 times like his brother told him. A light flicked on inside and a tall guy with tattoos and headphones opened the door. Tyler, Jason said, panting. We need your help. Tyler took one look at them and let them in. Inside was all wires and computers and clutter. Mia pulled out the flash drive. There's proof on here. Stuff about the military covert missions. Names, people trying to kill our teacher. Tyler blinked. You serious? Jason nodded. Dead serious. Tyler plugged in the drive. The screen lit up dozens of files encrypted, locked under code. Mia looked at the screen. Can you open them? Tyler nodded slowly. I can try. But if this is real, someone's going to come looking. Jason turned to the window. They already are. Back at Lincoln High, room 204 was empty. The substitute had left after only 10 minutes saying Ms. Carter told him to. The principal stood outside the door, confused and agitated. No one had seen Ms. Carter since she walked into the hallway. No one except a janitor who found the emergency exit door cracked open. The hallway security camera had been disabled. Whoever came for her didn't want to be seen, and they weren't. In a black SUV parked behind the track field, 2 men sat in silence. She's off script, one of them said. The other man looked at the tablet in his lap. They gave the kids the drive. Then we move. Now Tyler's studio was dark, the blinds closed, the lights dim. He worked fast, fingers flying across the keyboard. These files are serious. They're about a mission called Iron Reef. No press coverage, no public record names. Of operatives' coordinates, images. Jason leaned in. Does it say Kara Dawson? Tyler clicked. Yeah. Says she went rogue. Last seen 12 years ago, presumed dead. They classified her as a liability, high risk, no retrieval. Mia whispered, she was supposed to die. Tyler kept clicking. Then he stopped. Oh no, what? I think they traced the drive. Jason froze. How old firmware? I didn't think. Suddenly the studio lights cut out. Tyler swore, back door. Now they grabbed the drive and bolted through the rear. Alley tires screeched somewhere close. Mia tripped. Jason caught her. Run. They darted across the street into an old parking garage and climbed 3 levels before stopping behind a column. They crouched low, breathing hard. Jason peeked down. 2 men in suits were walking slowly through the ground level. Not cops, not agents, ghosts, professionals, Jason whispered. We need to warn her. Mia was already texting, but no reply. She's not answering. Jason clenched his jaw. We're not leaving her. We go. Back. Mia hesitated. They'll expect that, Jason nodded. Exactly. Which is why they won't. We go around through the service entrance. Tyler texted again. I copied the files, sending to secure cloud. But I'm out. They know my face. Jason texted back. Thank you. Then he looked at Mia. Let's finish this. For her, for the truth. They slipped out the far side of the garage into the shadows. No plan, just instinct. The city stretched ahead of them. Silent watching, waiting.